Welcome back to Lessons from Last Time, our latest episode. This is episode 51.
Wow.
Is that right? I think it's 51. It's been a lot of interviews, but on 51, I'd like to make a change to this podcast.
Well, you get to.
We typically dive right in with our guest, and right now I just thought we'd start by talking about our guest, just you and me, Kirk. And then we'll let him kind of come in as if he's not here right now, sitting right across from us, wondering what
Fuel
is
all
going
of his
on.
insecurities.
Exactly. So, a lot of people that we've had on have stories where they've been loan officers and really struggled through. We've had people, my buddy Brian that has never seen the mortgage industry and had, liver trouble, had to get a liver transplant. So we've had a number of different, types of interviews on here. One of the coolest things is when you can get somebody who coaches, because then we can pull the lessons from last time out of their life, but we can also pull the lessons that they've taken from a lot of these experiences they've had, these conversations that they've had. And so bringing on Steve Scanlon gives us that opportunity to get not just what makes Steve Scanlon him and why did he make the decisions he did, but also what can we learn from those, not just his experience, but others' experience.
It's going to be kind of interesting because he's had a really diverse experience as a coach, both in the past and in the present, and his reality at ReWire. But he's also been involved in the Master's Circle, which involves some pretty accomplished people.
Yeah.
So while we may not name names, there's going to be some stories or some experiences from that pool of resource from which he can draw.
And sadly, I joined the Master's Coach after he was not there, so I only got the legacy of what he did with Master's Coach. So, but I've heard he's pretty amazing. Should we bring him in?
So you can blame all of your current deficiencies on the fact that Steve wasn't around.
That he was gone.
Yeah.
He left. Yeah.
Let's bring him in.
Okay. Steve, welcome to the podcast. I hope you didn't hear any of that sitting across the table from us.
Hear what?
Exactly. All right, cool. So, dude, I know you from really not that many years. I don't know the story of how you became who you are today and how you became got into this whole industry. And so I'd love a little bit of backstory on, where were you? Were you in mortgage before? Were you, what was your story growing up?
Growing up, well, I promise to do this somewhat succinctly.
Give me like 2 hours of this. That'd be great.
2 hours of third grade.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Here's as succinct as I can make it. Ready?
Yep.
And it's facts. Like I'm not.
Yeah, totally.
It'll be facts, but kind of hopefully in a story way. I was actually born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is a state, as it turns out. Like
Albuquerque
New Mexico is.
Oh, New Mexico is.
Like
okay,
some
cool.
people didn't know that. So I was born and raised in Albuquerque very early on as a weird sort of thing. I was a springboard and platform diver. By the time I was a junior in high school, I was a high school All-American twice, which meant I was top 20 in the country.
Whoa.
I took a full ride scholarship to the University of Hawaii, and then I transferred after 2 years to James Madison University, which I won't tell you that story, but it really had to do with a girl, to be honest. And I went to Virginia, and I was in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I graduated with a degree. I did dive there. And I was just telling someone the other day, if you went to James Madison University today, all my records are still in the pool.
Are they really?
But mostly because of Title IX.
Oh, okay.
There is no more men's swimming and diving that's scholarshiped. And so there won't be the same level of whatever. So Title IX, if nothing else, got my name still up at James Madison University, which was from I won't even tell you, but a long time.
Yeah.
No, it was probably 87 and 88
Okay.
and 89. So after that, I got a degree in finance and economics, and I was offered all these jobs at that point in time. And this organization called me and said, "How would you like a fun summer job diving in wherever you want to go?" They were a company called Worldwide Productions. And if I remember, the guy was like, "You can go to Brazil," because they were just looking at lists. They know I know how to do this. I was, an All-American, and I dove at the NC2A level and all this other stuff. And one of the places they mentioned was Italy, and I have heritage there, and that intrigued me. And so I was like, a fun summer job in Italy after college. Who wouldn't do that?
Diving, what you love to do.
Diving. So if you ask my family or a lot of my friends, the story is Steve joined the circus. Which, when you looked at what we were doing in that show, I got to tell you, it's not far off. It was sort of circusy like. I was diving in a water park in Italy, in northern Italy, 3 times a day in a show. That's like the circus. It was the circus.
Yeah.
I'm really going fast, as quickly as I can.
Well, I'm going to slow you down just for a second. So you joined the circus. I
See how that story gets propagated?
Totally.
It didn't really, well, anyway.
Well, no, I always think the time of technology matching with the time of what you're going through. So had you been in 2024, your diving wasn't going and joining the circus. It was, let's get you, trending on social media with all these dives. But because of the time frame, it was like, let's go put on a show. And then you're out there performing. Super cool, but super different than it would be today for a diver in high school or college.
And the only reason I mention any of the athletics, because it's not like, I was pretty good at what I did. I wasn't ever that great, and here's why. If you look at me, I don't look like a diver. Divers are tall or skinnier people. I'm Fred Flintstone. That's only relevant to my life because why coaching became interesting for me is because I could actually see the sport almost better than I could do it. I just didn't have the natural ability. I was given the desire to do it, and it took me really, really far. I could never, I was in the 𝗥𝗲𝘄𝗶 era, and so I was never going to be close to that. But it allowed me, that's why coaching in my life later on, because I had a lot of coaches and I could see stuff, and that's why that's all relevant. I met my wife that first summer, who's still my wife. 30,
she saw you diving. She's
34
like,
years later. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is she took a fun summer job after a subspecialization in sports medicine. So she was the doctor in the water park. These water parks in Europe.
In Italy, where you went?
Yeah.
Were you together at that point?
No. I just remember getting hurt a lot. Had to
I'm
see
sure
this.
it's my hammy. Can
It
you
hurts
just work
here.
the hammy?
It hurts here. And then I don't know. It was like a year and a half later we got married. Our first daughter was born in Italy in '91. We have 4 kids now. Our second son has 2 kids. You're having some of your kids, and so very briefly we moved back to New Mexico. I started a printing company with my brother. And I ended up selling that company to him. I started an importing and exporting company that I ended up getting out of in different ways. And then my good buddy from Colorado called me and said, hey, we graduated James Madison University together. And he called me one day and said, I want to start a mortgage company. Want to be a part of it. Well, he didn't really start a mortgage company. What he really wanted to do was start a wholesale and correspondent side of an existing mortgage company. So technically, my stint in mortgage was on the wholesale and correspondent side.
I think that makes 100% of the mortgage guests we've had said, I was doing this thing and a buddy called and said, you want to get into this?
I was doing this thing that had nothing to do with the mortgage business.
Yeah.
And then I got in the mortgage business.
Well, dude, that's funny because I got to tell you, I never wanted to get into it, but my first experience with it was getting a mortgage. And I remember walking out of that closing going, I got to be able to do this better. I didn't know there was a T in mortgage. Whatever that, it's
silent. It's hard to.
Well, I know, but I walked out going, that was horrible.
Oh my gosh.
And so I don't even know what it's about. But if that person can do it, that might be something I'm interested in. So when Will called me, I was actually between things, and so I took it. And so I actually worked for that company. I was the national production manager on the wholesale and correspondent side. In '99, we shut it down because the spigot changed pretty quickly on that side. And I spent some time on the retail side until I met Daniel 𝗪𝗁 at a Todd Duncan conference in '90. I'd known Todd since 1996. I met him. And Daniel stood up in 1999 at a conference that Todd was doing. By the way, it was in the Bay Area. And for anybody listening, that particular conference had people like, was Jim Rohn there actually? There was some pretty big names.
Yeah.
And I was listening and all into it. And Daniel stood up and started talking about coaching. And I was like, wait, what? I didn't even know it was a thing. But kind of maybe my athletic background. And I walked up to him and said, I'm going to do what you do. And I actually walked away from that company in Colorado and moved my 4 kids and my wife and 2 dogs with a U-Haul to Oregon. Wow. This was late '99. And so I didn't start till 2000. And then I became a coach and I was working with Billy Champions for 13 years.
Fascinating component about what you just said.
Was that enough? Is that too much of
no,
life?
That was cool.
Is that
was cool.
Synthesized enough?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what jumped out to me. You talked about I was not the greatest diver ever. However, Title IX notwithstanding, your records still stand at James Madison. You were pretty good. And what you said, your attribute that you saw in yourself was you were able to see clearly the picture of what was supposed to be done, what was supposed to happen as it applies.
Well, and I got to be coached by 𝗥𝗲𝘄𝗶𝗿 one time.
Oh, wow.
Are you serious?
He was horrible.
As a coach.
Horrible.
That doesn't surprise me.
Why?
Because he had no capacity to not understand why someone couldn't do it at that level.
Yeah.
You could watch Super 8 films of that kid when he was 5.
Yeah.
Just like watching Tiger Woods swing a club when he was 3 years old. You're going, they never almost not had it. That was a God-given thing or whatever that was given to them.
Right.
And so I don't know that they had the capacity to see it. And by the time I was 16 years old, I had parents coming to me going, hey, would you coach my kids? Because I was almost better at seeing than I could do it.
That ability to see is what I was getting at. That ability to see doesn't surprise me that eventually organically led into, I want to coach.
Yeah.
And the perspective you had when you met Daniel and moved in that direction.
Yeah.
There was no fear involved. Like standing on the high dive at Cowell Pool in Concord, California growing up, I was pretty scared of the high dive, but once you get used to it, it's fine. But I would look up at those towers and be like, oh.
I dove at that pool.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Far Westerns were in Concord, California.
No way.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But you weren't scared to climb up to the top tower?
Well, it's like anything else. There's some people that would be terrified by doing this.
Right.
You do this enough, you don't get scared. I mean, day one, you don't go up on that tower. I mean, it's just very, very gradual, which is probably most sports. People would come to a diving meet and go, how do you do that? And we pretend like, oh, we do. I'll tell you how you do it. You do it by being in the frickin' pool for 6 hours a day, just repeating it over and over and over and over and over again. It's just a lot of repetition. So probably not. I'm a little more afraid now. I actually grown into a little bit of a fear of heights, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
Well, because I stand over bridges and go, you know what I could do there? And so my 57-year-old body knows it can't, but my 19-year-old brain still remembers that. And so, even to this day, my wife laughs. I would say 3 or 4 times a month, I still dream about diving.
Really?
I'm still doing it.
Fascinating.
Well, when you do that, again, that gets into some of the neuroscience. When you do that when you're little and have a bunch of myelin over and over and over and over and over again, you're going to carry that with you your entire life.
In your dreams, do you get out of the pool in total pain because your hip kind of got knocked out?
No, but the dreams aren't particularly pleasant because
Really?
for some reason I carry with me who I currently am, and I'm still doing it, and I know I can't, but I remember how. Wow. And so there's this combination of knowing that I can't do it, but remembering what it felt like.
Interesting.
I think that's every day for me.
That's every day.
Yeah. So you get out, you start coaching. You obviously had done some coaching, you said, in the diving world, but when you get into coaching loan officers, that's a whole different world.
I mean, yeah, it is. One of the things that we do at ReWire is we have this, I'll quickly describe, we have this Venn diagram. Like if you guys wake up one day, man, I really want to help people. Well, we've thought about that. You could wake up in there, think about 5 different disciplines of helping people. And we didn't create these categories. I'll just lay them out for you if you thought about them in a Venn diagram. You could be a mentor. You could be a consultant. You could be a teacher. You can be a counselor, or you could be a coach. Okay. And each of those things probably has a lot, like counseling has a lot of subcategories like therapy and psychology and different things. I've put that under that category. I think coaching is a very distinct discipline. And it's very distinct from consulting, and it's very distinct from teaching. In fact, when someone calls me and is like, man, I really want to be a coach, most of the time I think, actually, you probably want to teach.
Oh, dude, it's totally different. I never want to be a coach. Like, I'll say it out loud right now. I've had people ask me to do ADHD coaching for them. And I'm like, first of all, I need ADHD coaching myself. I see a coach. But secondly, I don't have any patience with people not doing what they said they were going to do, or not being able to get out of bad habits, or I just don't, I couldn't do it. I could talk to you from a stage all day long. But if it's one-on-one, I don't want to say I don't have the interest, because I do care about people, but I don't have the patience.
But that's really important for you to know, because that distinguishes coaching from teaching and coaching from consulting, right. Specifically consulting. And again, I'm not here to disparage anybody listening to this, but the International Coaching Federation, there are governing bodies for this. And as it turns out, there's a huge academic resource to coaching. I mean, Tony Robbins and Goldsmith and these people call themselves the father of coaching. Richard 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 is the father of coaching. This guy is a professor at Case Western University and was studying the field of coaching in 1969, some 25 years before anyone even called it that. These people were researching and studying, and as it turns out, there's this massive academic understanding of what this particular discipline is. So what a lot of people might not understand is that in the coaching arena, in its purest form, like when you go through the International Coaching Federation or the Neuro Leadership Institute, which we're all certified in my company, if I ever give you advice, ever, If I go, Kirk, here's what I'd do if I were you. That language, if the ICF heard that, they'd go, you're out. Under no circumstances ever, under any circumstances, you give anyone advice in coaching, ever.
Wow.
Now,
Not even a have you tried? Or is have you tried not advice? It's more...
yeah, well, there's a whole thing at the Neuro Leadership Institute where they teach you to ask questions. So to your point about patience, they have a whole thing at the Neuro Leadership Institute where they teach you to ask questions. And the whole idea behind coaching is to help someone find their own insight. If you can find your own insight, if you have an aha moment, when a client says to me something like, man, it really dawned on me. To me as a coach, it's more important what dawns on you than my advice to you. And when I first heard that, I was like, okay, that's, but then I learned why, when you study the neuroscience behind that. So if I tell you what to do, and you come to me and go, dude, that was great advice. I mean, here's what I do with your wife, with your kids, whatever advice I'm going to give you, right? If I tell you what to do, two primary things happen. And you come to me and go, oh, Scanlon, that was great advice. Okay, well, two things happen. I get a dopamine hit. Look at me and my great advice. And I rob you of a needed neural pathway, because what we can now track, even if I tell you something good, the length of time that neural pathway exists in your mind and the ability to take action on it are much greater when you think of it and I don't give it to you, even if I'm dead right.
Because I just gave away my authority to make my own decision on that subject, and I transferred it to a coach or a mentor or a counselor.
That's right.
Or a
and
consultant.
So now when you think about all these companies are coming, you should do this and you should do that. And I hear all this and I'm going, okay, it's not that they're wrong. It's just that it does require a very specific discipline to come in and wait for someone. And I got to tell you, it's very difficult to do.
Well, I'm doing it for you at that point, right? I'm not doing it for me.
Exactly.
Well, either that or you might be doing it for you, but this is exactly what happened to me in all those years as a coach and why I got into ReWire, if you really want to know. What I saw was I could tell people what to do. I could hold them accountable to do it. We can get people to do stuff by Friday. I didn't personally experience a lot of sustenance. It wasn't sustaining. When the discipline stopped, the action stopped. It didn't sustain. And so I went on a quest to go, God, that doesn't seem to be like as effective as I thought it could be. What is that? And that's what drove me down the whole path of neuroscience and where I was going with that.
You described ReWire as this pursuit of how and why humans change. We had a conversation the other day. This is a great lead in to that description. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I can. I mean, is your question, are you asking me why I think humans change or how they change?
How that fed into the move from whatever coaching you're involved in to establishing ReWire in this platform, and what you chose to do differently?
Yeah, I wish I had some point in time conversion because it would make the story so powerful. But I just think over time, what was happening to me is I was like, I really started to grow in a different understanding of maybe what I wanted to see and that I couldn't even quite define. I didn't know what it was. But then I started to take some classes, and I went to some of the workshops that my mentor to this day is a gentleman by the name of Lyndon Crow, and his company is Productive Learning down in San Clemente, California. And I started to get into these classes, and then all of a sudden the whole field of emotional intelligence went right to me, and it's actually since 2002, really since the perfection of fMRI, functional magnetic resonant imaging. Now we have access in ways to the brain that we didn't before. And so all of a sudden that we were learning as a community, like, whoa, this whole field of emotional intelligence, I got super interested in that because it felt to me like that was getting closer to what created genuine, sustainable change in people. And so I really wanted to create a company, which I did, ReWire, around the idea of could we pursue long-term sustainable change in people. And we're still pursuing it. But it's extremely difficult.
In your journey to get educated on that, like what did you do to become more of an expert? Because it's not, and by the way, I've seen people talk about the brain that it is very clear they read one book. And you're like, oh,
I read two, dude.
Look at you,
I've
Brain.
got two.
See, way more mastery.
Yeah. I think in Far Side cartoons. Can I tell you about a Far Side
gosh,
cartoon?
I love Far Side.
Okay, there was this one Far Side cartoon where it's funny that Gary Larson was able to do something in a picture that takes us like 20 minutes to describe, and he could just do it in one picture. That's
Right.
That's a genius. But there were these two people sitting on a bench when behind them are all these flames and stuff, and they are in hell.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them looks like a guy from the 17th century, and the other one is playing a banjo, and the whole caption is Mozart in hell.
Oh, nice.
Like he's got to sit in eternity and listen
Next
to a
to
guy
the
play.
banjo.
No offense to people that play the banjo. When I, to your point about read one book, when I went through a course at UCLA called Interpersonal Neurobiology, taught by Dr. Daniel Siegel, based on his book Mindsight.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so Mindsight, I did this whole coursework through UCLA, and I've tried to engage myself as best I could in all the coursework, but you still come to an understanding that I can sit and tell you about the brain all I want, but I'm the guy playing the banjo, and Dr. Siegel and Susan David and Lisa Feldman Barrett and all these other people that I could mention, these are the Mozarts. I'm not. I can clearly admit that. Now, am I passionate about it? I will tell you that I have a fairly addictive personality, as do you. I noticed you don't just do push-ups, right? We do a whole challenge for a year and we go crazy on stuff.
Right.
So I have a fairly addictive personality. So I try to turn that towards things that are constructive, because if I didn't, I'd probably be heroin or cocaine or something like that. I'm sure that's where it would turn.
Right.
So for me, it turned towards neuroscience.
I call it chasing the rush, right? You need that rush. And so you're getting that rush studying, which is what I love to
do. And so I probably did read more than one book, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you like I listened to Huberman's Lab in Stanford, that podcast.
Yeah, so good.
He's Mozart.
Yeah.
That guy's brilliant. And there are some really, really brilliant people out there doing it. Now, I get to come to industries and people in business that might not be as interested in plasticity and or neurobiology or some of the chemistry, and I get to be a translator for them. And so maybe I can help translate a little better, But hey, if you really want to learn something, then bring Susan David onto the call or someone like that.
Addictive personality, of course, you know yourself very well, but I also see in your past with diving, this is a discipline. This is a sport that requires a great deal of discipline, body control, repetitive function, entering the water at a certain angle so as not to create a splash. It reminds me of golf. Golf is a very mechanical game. In order to master it, you have to master the mechanics of different shots and different setups and different clubs. It seems to me that you have this attraction to processes and to understanding them.
Yeah, and specifically, I love golf. You and I have played golf a couple times.
I was with you when you hit your best score at Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
was fun to watch.
What did I? I played pretty well that day.
It was amazing.
Well, and I tell people, and again, this is by no way, I could talk about golf and my golf. Talk about the guy that's in hell with a banjo. Like, geez. However, I was a 20 handicap, and today I'm a 6. I'm not a 6 necessarily because I have all this physical strength or mobility, flex. I don't. I have none of that. It's because I'm so passionate about the mental side of the game. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, yes, I like processes. I seem to be attracted to the ones, and that would be, there's a whole nother podcast that I'm sure that we could do around the work that was written by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy at Harvard called Immunity to Change. The Immunity to Change work brought to the table this idea of adaptive changes and technical changes. So if you think about sports, golf's a perfect example. There are technical things that you can do. If you went to the range with somebody, you got to take the club out like this. You got to technical things that you need to do. Get your hips through like this, blah, blah, technical. Then there are adaptive changes, which are things like, what's your mindset? How are you thinking about it? And this all of a sudden, to the people listening to this is why using analogies like this isn't that different from people in the mortgage space. Mm-hmm. If you're in the mortgage space, you need to know how to calculate self-employed income. You need to understand, the things that you guys teach and bring to the table. There are technical things. So the question is, your success as a leader or a producer or an owner, whatever it is, how much of it is technical versus how much is adaptive mindset? Mm-hmm. Because some of the greatest athletes, and I save all these videos. Golf's one of the things that I like a lot, but I just recently watched a Cameron McCormick video. He's Jordan Spieth's coach.
Okay.
And he did this whole thing about Spieth's working on this and the technical stuff. But at the end of the day, 80% of their work together is mindset.
Fascinating.
And most athletes know that. I mean, listen to Kobe, listen to, when he used to talk, and all these other athletes, listen to great baseball players. Are there technical things? Yes. Do we need to understand how to do this business better technically and take a better application and do all the things technically that we know we need to do? Yeah. How much of it, especially in the last lessons from last time? What are we learning? How are we adapting to this? These are adaptive changes in the work of Keegan and Leahy. I think they did some incredible work. And so, at the end of the day, when you ask me about ReWire is primarily an adaptive-based coaching company. Hey, if you want technical coaching, someone to come in and go, you need to do this, call other people. They're pretty good at that. And I'm not putting that down. By the way, we need both.
Right.
We're specialists in adaptive-based coaching.
If you are watching this podcast and you're in the mortgage industry and you haven't checked out the Knowledge Coop, you definitely need to dive into the Knowledge Coop. In there, you will find content and community that will help you grow as an individual by learning everything there is to know about the mortgage industry. If you think you know everything, just dive in and take some classes because there's always something more you can learn. To be successful in this business, you've got to continually learn. In addition, if you're a company and you want to teach your people in your own environment, we've got that in the Knowledge Coop Enterprise Services. So reach out to us, check out knowledgecoop.com. Definitely join Coop Plus. Let's get back to the podcast. So you've got to check out Breaking Point. And it's one of the untold documentaries. And it's a tennis player that could have been amazing and then became amazing. But the work that he did was all mindset. And then he had massive anxiety attack and couldn't even play anymore. It's a really cool story because it goes through, he had all the talent in the world, but he had to get his mind in the right place to be able to win. And then once that got knocked off, everything was, his world was destroyed.
Oh, and there's all kinds of sports. I mean, the inner game of tennis, you could play cricket or badminton or surf. Bring Daniel in here and he's going to let me, surfing's like life. We find these metaphors in sports, but at the highest level, it's not usually one or the other, it's both. The problem is the adaptive side of it can get pretty esoteric. And so I find our world succumbing to a lot of looking for technical solutions. And that's fine. And it'll take you a little place, but if you really want to get great at your work, you might want to search for what are some of the adaptive solutions to some of my adaptive problems and not just technical ones.
And I'd be willing to bet that the wall that people run up against is almost never on the technical side. If you get somebody who's competent in an area of expertise that you're trying to gain expertise in, you can learn the redundancies of what you need to do to have a better hitting posture or better control of picking up the pitch out of the pitcher's hand, so you have a little bit better idea what's coming. Or in golf, there's plenty of examples of the technical side and the mechanical side. But for change to occur in that area, you just need more understanding and then do the redundancies, what you need to do over and over again. But change on the adaptive side, the mental approach to how we approach life, who we are. You talked about change being so difficult, and you talked about 3 components to change. You talked about the ability to change, you talked about how we go about changing, and then you talked about maybe the most difficult obstacle to overcome, which is the desire to change. Can you delve into those 3 just a little bit?
Yeah, give me the 3 again.
Well, the first one was the ability to change.
Well, we don't have to talk about that one. I mean, in the work that I do, sometimes I'll tell people, we have sayings in English. You can't teach an old dog. New tricks. Yeah. Well, that's neurobiologically inaccurate. We change. That's what the whole field of plasticity is about, and we've long since proved that. Now, whether they can prove neurogenesis, which is neurons that actually regenerate, I think we can see that now in the hippocampus, but not all parts of the brain. We don't know. But what we know is that we change throughout our entire lives. So, and then I think it was Will Rogers, I'm not sure, that said people change, but not much, right? But I think when I help people understand, you can change, it's so funny that's not always met with high critical acclaim. Because I think people, if you can change and you're not, then you got a problem. Yep. It would be better off, when I have people go, oh, I'm this guy. I don't wake up early because I'm this. Sometimes I want to go, you learned that.
I'm not a morning person.
Yeah. Morning people. And again, over time, I know you feel like that. I don't know of any gene that's, you're a morning person gene. That is learned behavior. And that's important because if you actually think in your mind that's who I stress out. I come from a long line of stressful people. We're just type A people. You weren't born stressed. No one is. There's no genetic predisposition that I know of. There's some probably epigenetics to that, but there's no genetic. You learned that behavior. That's interesting because if you learned it, then you can maybe have some belief system where you can unlearn it. So that we can change. We don't have to talk about that. We can.
Sure.
What's the second one?
Second one was, how do we begin to engage change, is the way I'd like to frame the question. You said in our conversation, how do we change? But I'd like to delve into.
Well, given the time that we have for this, like that's as close to the $1 million question as you can pose. Like, I don't want to sit here and put like, oh, I have the answer to that. Like 3
points for how you can change your life. Yeah. We'd like to avoid that too. Yeah.
You know, but I do find that interesting, right? 3 easy ways to have, abs and, whatever. How? Well, I would say one way, it gets to your third point, which is desire.
Which is maybe the most important.
Yeah, but you see how those interplay?
Absolutely.
Like if I don't have the desire, then I'm not going to learn how to do it. And sadly, there aren't a lot of people who want to change, which is why I wrote the book on the lizard brain, right? The lizard brain, this construct in our mind is all about, that part of your mind is actually a self-protective part that keeps us from change. If you're here and you have clothes on, there's a whole part of your brain going, do that again. And even when you're able to see possibilities and great things, there's an entire construct in your mind going, yes, but those even good things represent a risk to the things that I have, which is why Jim Collins writes and says things like the enemy of great is good. And so the risk to our good in our mind is sometimes what precludes the how to change, because so many people actually, when they think about it, like, I don't really want to change.
On the wired stuff, it's interesting. One of my favorite pictures is the elephant with the small chain. I don't know if you've seen that, but they train them to think, there's no way I can break this thing tying me, and then they just need to put a tiny little chain on them. So the brain is like, well, I've tried that before and it totally didn't work, so I'm just not going to try it again because I don't think it's going to work next time.
Yeah, I was recently I did a, just to kind of show you, I get up every day and it's going to be heroin or neuroscience. So I did this. I was reading this whole research paper on the power of placebos. And this is widely documented in the medical community. Placebos frickin' work.
Wow.
They work. You can give someone, now, when you read the statistics, it's not 100%, and I get that. But if people think that they're doing something good for them, what the brain can actually create in our bodies is phenomenal. And they know this. They know this in cancer research. Does it cure cancer? No, but it has given people a lot of hope and a lot of length for, further on in their life. And the power of placebos. You should research that. It's really fascinating.
That's been pretty well documented for decades now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not new news.
But it's a difficult one to talk about, because if you talk about that to someone, you're exposing the very thing. If I know I'm taking a placebo, it's no longer a placebo.
Right.
Man, this is powerful stuff. I have so many ways I want to go with this, but I will tell you, one of the funniest things that's happened to me this week is I was in my therapy appointment, and I've been seeing a therapist for 15 months, working on becoming the best version of myself, right? Just pounding away during one of the worst times in, the history of the mortgage industry. This has been the worst. And so I felt like I needed help. In this last week, she's like, you're really living a different life than you were. And I go, yeah. And she goes, what do you think happened? I'm like, I have no freaking idea. It was like over time convincing me that this is the life I want, and then helping me understand, all right, well, these are the things that aren't what I want. These are the things that are what I want, helping me rewire to where we went to this conference last week. It was probably the best conference I've been to, but mainly for my brain. Like, I got there with intention. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew how I wanted to do it. And I had just kind of gradually become somebody without knowing it. And I'm wondering, when you coach people, do you find that people go, wow, why am I so different? That's really strange. Because it's not like this awakening. Yeah. It's just over time, different wiring changes.
Well, remember, one of the disciplines of my Venn diagram is counseling or therapy.
Yeah.
Therapists, in my view, they're primarily there to help you understand something about you, and specifically in the past. Where did you come from? How, so that you can be more effective in the present. Something has happened, whereas coaching is primarily maybe a look out the windshield, right? Like when I hear that and I have no freaking clue. As a coach, I would probably lean into you having an understanding of that.
Yeah, totally. And
because if you don't know how you got there, right? Because there's here, I'll give you two cool neuroscientific sayings. One is, if you can name it, you can tame it. If you name it, you can tame it. And I always couple that one with Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist. Carl Jung had a saying. He said, "What we resist persists." So if you name it, right? And again, I'm sorry for my golf analogies, but sometimes you'll hear these golfers, they're going, "Oh man, I'm really worried about this one." Some people are like, "You can't think negative thoughts." Actually, if you don't name your negative thoughts, they end up kicking your butt. Naming them is part of taming them. Oh, that's what that is. This isn't about going, "Can never feel this way again." Because if you attempt that, it will ride you like a horse for your life. As opposed to going, "I have this thing, I get it, I way understand it." So when it comes, and it will, you're better at going, "That's what that is." Got it. Because if you can name it, you can tame it. So you going, "I don't know." I'm glad you're in a different space. That's cool. I'd help you know exactly. Maybe spend some time on, what am I learning about me? Where did that come from? So you can make some connections, because when it comes again, you're much more equipped to go, "That's what that is."
I think that's part of what it was, is the power of knowing where things come from, right? So it's, this ties back to that thing. And it's like, oh yeah. And so it just kind of gradually things have less power over me because I've named them and gone, oh yeah, that makes tons of sense. The Happiness Trap, super good book. Talks about pulling your anxiety or your depression or whatever's going on. You pull it out and you stare at it and you're like, "Look at that." And you point at it. Mindy and I use that in marriage. We're like, "Look at the problem." Instead of it being, kept within ourselves, you break it out. And I think our brain is able to then look at it and go, "Okay, I can look at it differently because I'm not attached to it."
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of that.
Well, you own this company and you started this company that's inextricably tied to mortgage banking. It's been the hardest year and a half. Let me ask you a question. Is your identity this?
It was. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want your identity to be this?
No, that's the work we've been doing. Is pulling myself out of that.
Right.
She caught
so
me
to
one time.
know that is your identity, because when you realize your identity isn't that, then what the heck do you care what's happening in the mortgage business?
Yeah.
Now we have to be aware of it. It's been the hardest, which is by implication, therefore going to impact you, because your identity was so linked to whether or not interest rates went to 7 or whatever.
Yeah. I'll tell you, and then we'll get away from my therapy. But the funniest
You have to rename this whole session.
Funniest thing in therapy is when she goes, I was talking about, I hate losing people. Like, I always want to be a big part of everybody's life inside of our company. I wanted to be a big difference maker for people in their lives. And she said at one point, she goes, "What are you worried about?" And I'm like, "They're going to leave me." And she goes, "Oh, they're going to leave you." And then she just sat there and I'm like, I had completely connected myself to the identity of the company. And it was such a fascinating thing to realize, because then I can get out of it. So,
Well, let's say they do leave you. Then what?
Right.
No, like I will get clients, like play that out. Now that's as close as I get to counseling, because I'm not a trained therapist, but then what? And then what? And then what? And I have some people that I've coached in the mortgage space, very, very wealthy, very highly successful people. And they seem to live their life 3 or 4 simple steps away from living on the street.
Wow.
So if this happens, if enough people leave you, well, then you're going to lose respect. If you lose enough respect, you're going to lose your company. If you lose your company, gosh, maybe even, your own family, you can't even put bills on the table. If this happens, and whether we know it or not, we live really close to that sequence until we can make sense of that and go, actually, that sequence isn't, that's a fabricated narrative, and I get into a lot of narrative circuitry in my mind. Like, you listen to people and you go, understand the difference between our inner narrative and what's direct experience, what's actually true.
It leads you back to the lizard and fear, and I mean that great.
Well, and part of the lizard brain is thinking that we're right. Every person that wakes up, that's a great proverb, right? All a person's ways seem right to them. Everybody thinks, in the moment they think it, we think we're right. You got to give the prefrontal cortex enough time to go, ooh, I probably shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that. But a lot of people just live with this, I got to be right.
You've committed a lot of your professional life energy to the change and how humans change and the process of change. But in our conversation, you said change is a really lousy marketing term. You said we'd be more effective if we think about it in the term of transformation, because really that's what we're.
Well, and it's just that word itself is not a good triggering word if you're trying to sell something.
Yeah. But transformation is powerful because it's essentially what I think a good counselor is trying to do, is lead you down a path of self-awareness to where you can.
Yeah, and maybe we're splitting words, changes, whatever. I'm just saying change in and of itself. It's funny. A lot of people know they need it, but nobody really wants to pay for it. And we will all of us will resist it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. What do you think because you have mortgage people in your practice.
Yeah.
In this last year and a half, what's been, if you could give advice to people from, see what I did there? I just asked him to give advice.
You're calling me in to be a consultant.
So funny. Yeah, no. From the experiences you've had, what do you think the biggest holdbacks we have are right now, or the biggest barriers to our success?
Yeah, well, this is what makes even talking about this a little challenging, because the minute I say, here's what I think is a barrier, I have to put into my mind, okay, here's one or two people that had this barrier. Mm-hmm. The challenge I have with that is people are so vastly different. Mm-hmm. And people have different changes at different levels. And I've always thought, well, I shouldn't say always, in the last really 10 years or so, coaching for me has become a process. When you talk about physics, you talk about something that is emergent. Mm-hmm. Emergence in physics is something that gives rise to itself. Okay, so clouds, we know are emergent properties, which is exactly why we know all this about the Earth. We have radar and stuff. We still can't predict the weather very well because clouds are emergent. Coaching's emergent because people are emergent. So the opposite of emergence is prescriptives and prescriptions. So when you ask me that, you're inviting me to offer at least some prescription. What do I think? Okay, can I give some generalizations about some of the stuff that I've seen? Sure. Mm-hmm. But when I'm on the phone coaching an individual, it's just fascinating. It's never the same thing. They're going through it differently. Who you are, Kirk, different. And so that also is difficult to sell, because people want to go, dude, just 5 ways. Just do these 5 things. And we laugh, and yet we're still buying that.
Yeah, it's the conference mentality.
We were at that conference, and a speaker said, if you want to make, do you remember how much money it was?
If you want to make $250,000 or $400,000.
Yeah, this many thousands of dollars, all you have to do is go grab this thing at my booth. And we're like, I don't know that that's right. I don't.
Pretty sure it's not.
I feel like everybody that picks that thing up is knocking, but they love the statement.
I have it in the workshop that I do. I created my own slide. I don't often do my own slides, but I was super proud of this one. I have a picture of Nancy Reagan and the Nike swoosh. And to my group, I'll say, what do Nancy Reagan and Nike have in common? And some people get it right away. What was Nancy Reagan's big slogan?
Just say no.
What's Nike's slogan?
Just do it.
So what's the common word there?
Just.
I want to write a book called Just.
Brilliant.
You have to.
No, because of how often, and it's not others, we do that. Dude, just do this. Just do that.
Do it to ourselves and we do it to others.
I need to just do this. And when we undervalue an adaptive process. And by the way, it leads to guilt. Why am I not just making more calls? Or it leads to technical changes. You need to make more calls to have more sales in mortgage. And then when we're not doing that, you know what we do? We need another call report. You need a better CRM. You need a better script. You need to understand something. You're probably not making.
Need to.
Just. So what I want to write the book about is just isn't wrong. It's just an undervaluing of what really needs to happen to create true transformation. So just say no. Yes, there's some people that need to say no to drugs. That's not wrong.
Right.
Just get up. Nike's like, just do it. Great. That'll sell shoes. For some of the things that are very important in our life, I think we need to go beyond just. Just does point to some technical things that we probably need to change. If we just stop at just, we often won't transform because of the word just.
Which is a great segue into a comment you made that took me a little bit by surprise, but after we chatted about it, I understand it. Not only do I understand it, I really see great value in the conversation. Just get an accountability partner. You talked about accountability in the context of the limited way in which we understand it, how it falls quite short in coaching context or in relationship context, and that concept as opposed to, let's say, empathy as an approach to engaging someone. Talk about your
Well, just get an accountability partner. You'll figure it out.
Yeah. You talked about it being based in guilt more than being based in meaningful change.
I always threaten like things like I'm going to write a book on justice. Like you have to. Like I've written 3 books. I only published 2 of them. That's not my skill. I mean, I can do it. Probably not my highest best use. So I threaten to write a lot of books, but I'm not going to probably, if I'm being honest. But one would be on a book on accountability, and I would probably spend the first half of the book out of hyperbole, right, exaggeration to make a point, going, this is a waste of time. Hyperbole is a joke and a waste of time in killing people in the corporate world. I think it's a terrible concept, right? Now, I do that for effect, of course, right? And I even want people listening here going, oh, we just did a whole lesson on the power of accountability and we want to create a culture of accountability. I've heard all these things. I just say, look, use the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that uses logic and language and reason. Most people in our culture tie accountability to some form of punishment or consequence. They just do. I'm going to hold you accountable, meaning if you tell me you're going to do something or you, Kirk, say you're going to do it and you don't, somehow I'm going to come in and go, well, you suck, or something like that. Well, the threat that I could propose, which is kind of a joke anyway, but if I could and you accepted it, then you're going into activity with a heightened threat state. We know that state secretes cortisol. Your adrenal glands will release cortisol. Ironically, shutting down, that doesn't shut down, it hinders the very part of your brain that you need to take the action. We're hurting people with accountability. Now, the second half of the book, I'd come back and say, I think accountability could be a wonderful thing provided that it was tied to empathy and trust and love and care. I'm not going to beat the crap out of you because you don't do something. I'm going to care enough to ask what it was. What did you learn about yourself? How do we learn? What did you learn? Did we take too big of a step? Let me ask you some questions about that and let me grow with you. Because if it wasn't tied to punishment or consequence, I think we can free people's brain to actually taking more action.
I think it would be I would be disappointed, and I'm guessing people watching or listening to this would be disappointed if we have Steve Scanlon on the podcast and we don't, you cannot do a dissertation in the next 10 or 15 minutes on the neuroscience of change or how the brain operates. But maybe what you could do in as brief a period as you can is to give us an introduction if someone really wants to dive deeper into understanding how the mind works, understanding how, and what resources we could seek out if we really want to take a deeper dive into understanding the neuroscience of change, the neuroscience of the human mind.
Yeah, great. I'm happy to do that. I'm trying to, in my own mind, distinguish the stuff that I get interested in versus maybe where people might start and go and do that, because it's like anything else these days, especially in the whole field. Neuroscience itself, like to even say that, how broad that field is? I mean, it's so huge, right? And so I guess I would ask some questions based on your question, which would, I would ask somebody, the fact that they're interested is step one. If you're not curious to even grow, well, then you're probably going to pick up a book and read it, and you may understand it academically, but your ability to apply it's going to be diminished through your own lack of curiosity. But curiosity is an interesting thing to coach, right? I can't give you an action plan, dude. I want you to be curious by Friday, right? Like that's a soft skill. And so I don't know how to coach that, but I can help someone foster curiosity or curate curiosity.
You won't hold me accountable to being curious?
Were you curious? Yes or no? Show me how.
Show me the chart.
But imagine being curious. Like I'm going to walk out of here and go, whoa, I was this. And I want to learn about me. There's so much to learn about me, right? When I get done with the workshops that we do, there's 2 questions we ask. What did you learn? Which is cool. What did you learn about you? What did you learn about you? The latter is probably a much more valuable tool for you because we can all sit there and there's a lot written about emotional intelligence. I know a lot of people who know a lot about this field. Ironically, I don't know if they're any more emotionally intelligent knowing a lot about it. So for me, the work of all this neuroscience is I'm trying to make it as applicable as I can, and frankly to myself, if I'm being really honest. If I didn't have to do this work for a living, I would just try to be a practitioner of it. I'm trying to practice metacognition. I'm trying to understand myself better. I'm trying to do my best to reduce cortisol, which I've done a pretty good job with. I still get anxious about and worried about some things, but way less than I used to because I'm applying this work. just that alone, everyone that comes in and talks about how bad the industry is, if I have one more person tell me what they did or didn't close in February, like what a mindset. I mean, if you're listening to this, if you're in the mortgage, like I assume a lot of people are in the mortgage business, it doesn't matter what you closed in February. The only way I can help you with what you're closing in February is go with a time machine. We can go back and look at November, what you may or may not have been doing, but we can't do that. So the whole industry, like, I understand we need to be present, but we need to think in a way where we're taking actions for something in the future. To your point, I would say if somebody was really interested in number one, the fact that you could be curious about yourself is step one. Picking up some simple books on emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman was kind of the pioneer of emotional intelligence. You could pick up his book. It was written in the 90s. I think Travis Bradberry and Gene Greaves wrote a book called EQ 2.0. There are certain simple books. Yeah, get interested in emotional intelligence. That'd be one thing. If you want to go a little bit deeper, and I'm just giving you books and some resources, I think mindsight by Dr. Daniel Siegel, that's been a Bible for me. Those 9 integrations that he talks about in mindsight are just, when I learned about that and went through that whole course, I realized, I thought I learned it, and not only to realize, like, there's this field in front of me of work that I could possibly go do. Narrative circuitry, my own narratives, versus direct experience. Oh, so much really cool work in that. So Mindsight's a great book. And then lastly, Immunity to Change. I mean, that was a book written in 2010 by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy that talks about competing commitments and adapted versus technical change. And I don't know that it's particularly that difficult to understand. But if people listen that really wanted to get into this and change and were like, I wonder what some of the adaptive changes in my life could be, and not just searched for technical things, I think that could be really, really helpful for people.
It's a great place to start. Define metacognition. You use that term a couple of times. Define
it. How much time do we have? Is that the real time? Like 52? Oh, crap. Define it. Meta is a Greek prefix word that basically infers the second part of any word. So if people are in the IT world, the metadata is the data about the data, right? That's what metadata is. So cognition.
And Mark Zuckerberg made all that up, which is really cool.
Yeah, maybe. He used meta. It was supposed to be something about something. Metacognition is, that's just a fancy word for learning how to think about how you're thinking.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thinking about thinking, which, by the way, I will point out, we go through this process, and we're doing our work as coaches, we're actually helping people practice metacognition. It is a practice. It is a skill. And if you get it wrong, you end up, you're not just observing your thinking in a way that might, the language that you've heard someone say, man, I'm really in my own head. You ever heard that language?
Yeah.
So does that sound like a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad thing.
Right. So metacognition is hopefully the positive side of being in your own head. It's understanding how you're thinking from a very objective, non-judgmental perspective so that you can learn. As opposed to going, ooh, I shouldn't think that. Or worse, I'm right. That person's a jerk. Yeah, he is or she is, And we have that spinning inner dialogue. That's not good. Metacognition is actually going, whoa, that's so interesting. Look at me think that.
So for the bulk of my life, and you know a little bit about this story, I played college football. I was an offensive lineman. I was a big guy. My entire adult life, I identified myself as a big guy. Only when I quit playing football, big was a little bit different than it was when I was 19 years old playing college football. And so my weight vacillated between 235 and 260, sometimes as high as 270. And that wasn't big in a good way at all. But that's how I identified. I'm a big guy. It's okay. I'm a big guy, or I'm big boned, or whatever you want to call it. And last May, and again, I've been going down this own, practice of my own of becoming more and more aware of my own thoughts and how they affect me. I quit identifying myself as a big guy, and I started to identify myself almost in a mantra-like way of, I am a fit, healthy human being who is active and engaged in things that lead to. And on May, 20th of last year, I was 248. And I said, I'm done with this. So I am fit, I am healthy. I'm going to change the way I think about, I'm going to quit calling myself a big guy. And I just began a process of eating better and walking.
And you even doing that is the power. Daniel Siegel would call that narrative integration.
Yeah.
You're integrating a narrative, because your narrative is what the Neuro Leadership Institute calls it narrative circuitry. frankly, Tony Robbins calls it neurolinguistic programming, right? There's different language for it. What we say to ourselves really, really matters. So like when people come into coaching, that's one of the things I think a good coach does is accurately reflect back to someone what they're saying to themselves. I just want to make sure I heard that. Here's what I heard you say. And sometimes that's really valuable to people like, whoa, did I? You know, and having a good coach and someone who's not just going to come in and give you advice and tell you what to do, but sometimes be a really good reflection, because we all have a lot of narratives. I mean, the Neuroleadership Institute, David Rock would tell you in his research that most of us live close to 90% of our lives in narrative circuitry. Only 10% of life, according to Rock's studies, is what's actually happening. The other 90% is what we narrate what's happening. And so if we don't look at the power of narrative, right? And this is how back to athletes, like these golfers, like, you know, that's why Cameron McCormick is, they're not taught. Yes, there are some skills they got to learn, but you want to get really great at that, just like you want to get really good at business. Let's start paying attention to what our narratives are.
On a super small level, so I'm playing golf recently, and I couldn't putt to save my life, right? I was a really bad putter. And every time I stood up with the ball, I'm like, I'm going to basically screw this up. Who knows where it's going? I have no idea. So I tried this thing for 18 holes. Every time I walked up to the ball, I went, I'm the best putter ever. Like I crush putting. Like I'm going to basically be really good at this. And I literally said it out loud to where my friends were laughing at me. I putted great. Like just saying it. And I know that's not, you know, I could go back out there and not putt great, but ever since I've been doing it, it works. And just feeling like that's going to happen was great. Yeah. Like my mind is dialed in and I just putt better.
Yeah. The last thing I say to myself before I putt is, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I pick a line and just, you know, and now you and I can't go, they all go in now. That would be a great story.
Yeah,
no,
totally.
They don't.
Yeah.
But learn, you know, boy, you're going to have to cut this out, but learn to, with all these golf analogies, if you've ever heard a caddy talk to a golfer, they could, you know, the golfer could be 150 yards out and like, I think it's a 9-iron. No, you better hit a wedge. And they could actually debate. And when the player says, I'm picking wedge, what does the caddy say? I love that. Commit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So here would be a really cool thing. Let's learn to talk to ourselves like a caddy talks to a golfer.
Mm-hmm.
And let's dismiss the notion that that's somehow modern day Eastern mysticism woo-woo, because you can go back to as a man thinketh. I mean, this idea has been around for a long time. Our ability to accept it and integrate it has been
all the
problem.
faith traditions. You know, my mentor would have said that. He said, never ever forget that Christianity is an Eastern religion. We Westernized it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Or
and so
Americanized
some of these faith traditions, that's what's kind of funny when you really start to listen. Even the stuff we're talking about, King Solomon has said, there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right. And so here we are thinking we're doing something in 2024 by having all these pithy comments like, really?
Yeah.
Like, this is a widely known body.
I will tell you the best golf I've ever played in my life. 12 games in a row in Scotland with a caddy, and different caddies every time. But playing with a caddy, I played out of my mind. And it was because I sat with the caddy when they first walked up. I'm like, look, I need you to make me laugh. Do not let me let me not laugh. Like, keep my spirits up, keep me happy. And then they did. And I played a better game. And they did that. They'd be like, this is the club for you, man. You're going to crush this thing.
Well, John Rahm was the number 17 player in the world for a long time, but he was this fiery Spaniard guy until somebody got a hold of him and worked on this very thing. And when he began to still his mind and tell different narratives like that, he became the number 1 player in the world. Anyway, we probably got to get going.
We're fine, but I want a couple things before we get to the end here. Tell me about Reality and Hope, and tell me about Still the Lizard.
Reality and Hope was a book that I wrote many years ago at Building Champions, and it was more of a combination of stuff that I was writing in a blog, and we assembled it into a book. It's a great bathroom book, if you want to think of it like that. It's not supposed to be read sequentially, and it's just advice that I was giving at the time. Nuggets. I read some of those. Isn't it fat? If that's one of the dangers in ever writing anything down, is 10 years later you look back at some of what you wrote and go, I don't even believe that anymore. And someone will come up to me and go, oh, that changed me. And I'm like, I'm grateful it did. And so I think there's some good stuff in there, but it just feels like the metamorphosis and transformation that I've been through Again, I'm proud of the fact that we did that, and I like it. It feels like a different part of me wrote that, and it's not bad. It's just different. I was thinking differently than I am today. Still the Lizard was an attempt to take what I was learning about neuroscience and this concept of the lizard brain, which anyone listening to this, I just read an article that people are putting this down and going, there is no such thing as the lizard brain. If you got 10 neuroscientists up there and said, tell me what the lizard brain actually is, 5 of them would say it doesn't even exist. The other 5 would disagree about what it actually is.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that interesting? And so I look at it as a construct, and I learned about it, and the lizard brain primarily does 5 things. There are 4 things. It looks for familiarity, it looks to be right, it looks to make habits, and it looks to control. And so when you look at familiarity, being right, habits, and control, and just overlay that on mortgage in the last year and a half, like those have been assaulted. Familiarity, like we don't, so this part that's trying to protect us in particular feels like, this is the worst ever, and you hear all this stuff, and you, when you learn to still that part of your brain, and by the way, go listen to Seth Godin. He talks about this on a TED Talk. He uses the language, quiet the lizard brain. You can't kill it because, so that was my little play on words. You can't kill it. You can only still it. You can learn to still the lizard brain. And so I tried to write that book for 3 or 4 years, and I couldn't because I kept trying to bring neuroscience into it, and I'm not a neuroscientist, right? I'm the banjo guy. And instead, I just wrote a simple little story about a guy named Jake Davis, who at the end of the day ends up being me. It was as much an autobiography as anything. In fact, when my wife was reading the manuscript, she came down one morning and she was like, she said, I was writing about being right about stuff. And she was reading the manuscript. She's like, have you read this? And I was like, oh. So I still have work to do on my own lizard brain, and I'm working on it.
A little autobiographical.
Yeah, and people come to me like, you wrote about me. And I'm like, well, if you think so, mostly it's about me, but whatever.
So if people want to get a hold of Steve Scanlon, how do they get a hold of you or ReWire?
ReWire Inc. I couldn't ever buy ReWire, as best I can tell. I looked for that URL. Maybe your people can help me find it again. But years ago, I looked for ReWire as a URL, but at last I learned it was still owned and they were squatting on the URL, and maybe they'll sell it to somebody for $1 million. But it was an electrical company based out of New Jersey, and I couldn't get it. So ReWire Inc. is like the big thing. So I'm just Steve at ReWire Inc. That's my email address. Info at ReWire Inc. Look up ReWire Inc. I'm not that hard to find on LinkedIn. I don't do a lot of social media. I almost said Instagram like my wife. I don't do that, but certainly on LinkedIn, our website's pretty robust, I think, in terms of what we do. And we certainly love to talk to people, especially somebody who's looking for adaptive changes and maybe gets tired of the rah-rah and has finally recognized that the technical stuff is not getting them the transformation that they want. And by the way, get really, really, really good at adaptive stuff and you'll kill it in this business.
I hope that's a takeaway everybody gets out of this. Like I always look for what are the things that people are really going to cling to. And that technical versus adaptive is so money. Because you can go technical all day long and you're totally missing out. You need both.
It's both.
Yeah.
It's both. I have a tendency because I'm such an adaptive based guy.
Right.
I find myself putting down the technical, but when you really read that work, they did this big study on losing weight. And the big thing about weight loss is and I'll spare you all the thing, or you can read it in the book because they did all this really cool research. Weight loss is primarily an adaptive problem, not a technical one.
Right.
But we still, as human beings, try to solve it with only technical means. So, hey, you want to lose weight? Eat less. Just eat less sugar. Just drink less alcohol. Just eat, drink more water. Just exercise. Just a bunch of technical things. It's not wrong, but we miss the adaptive parts. When you think of yourself and you have this narrative like, hey, Kirk, you're just this guy. Could you work with someone to recognize that that has been your narrative? And that work right there is adaptive work. And lo and behold, look at you. You didn't get there only by technical means. At least that's not what your story implied.
Not at all.
Right? So that's a funny thing and the weight loss industry still to this day is highly technical. Why? Because people want to pay for technical things.
Right. Yeah.
They are seemingly faster, easier. And, we look for that as a culture. That's, but that's a whole nother, that blows my mind away. Like I still anthropologically, sociologically, biologically, I can't understand why we continue to buy stuff that doesn't work in the long term.
Eat this pill, lose 50 pounds.
Yeah. It feels like action.
Yeah.
Well, I've got one more question for you.
Yeah.
And first of all, congratulations on being one of the few people we've ever let take over 60 minutes.
Dude,
so we rocked
oh,
it out.
Because it's
cut it
literally
out.
impossible
It's
to
so
contain
good
this
that you
conversation.
can't-
Throw
We
it
could
away.
go for 3 more hours. Like this could be a very long pod if we let it, but this is perfect. My question to you is, if you had to go back, knowing everything that you know, the experience that you had, if you were to go back to 10-year-old Steve Scanlon and give 10-year-old Steve Scanlon just one piece of advice based on all the wisdom you've gained over your years, what would you tell that
Or
kid?
ask him one thought-provoking question
Yeah.
rather than giving him advice.
Oh yeah, good call. Good call.
If I could ask one thought-provoking
You stopped my
question.
trap. I was going to get him to just advise and be a consultant.
Here's the advice. Well, it's interesting. That exercise is something that Lyndon, my coach, has brought me through. So unfortunately, I get to go talk to little Stevie a lot. And for anybody that really wants to see an incredible depiction of this, go watch the Disney movie The Kid with Bruce Willis.
Oh, yeah.
He has to come to understand his inner person, who is in him, who is a ring in his tree. Notwithstanding the fact that he tries to use medication and stuff to get rid of the kid, but he learns later the kid is him.
Wow.
And so I think I could summarize it in accept. You're going to fail. It's okay. People are going to walk away from you. It's okay. Accept. The problem is the 57-year-old Steve can't talk to the Stevie because the Stevie doesn't have a developed prefrontal cortex. We're operating primarily on emotions at that point. And so I don't know what I would have told him. I would have used all these big words like metacognition, and little Stevie would have said, can I get some ice cream? Or whatever.
Like the kid in The Kid.
Exactly. He had to learn how
It's a brilliant movie.
It's a Disney movie. It's not animated. It's with Lily Tomlin and Emily Mortimer and
But you could easily skip over it, just discounting it as a cute little...
oh my goodness.
brilliant movie.
I watch that movie at least twice a year because him going back and learning about who he is a brilliant depiction.
I think that word is probably the beginning of healing for a lot of mortgage people right now, and accepting what happened, that it's that Robin Williams, it's not your fault scene in Good Will Hunting. Like, it's all right. Accept and move forward.
See, but now you
did
did this to me, and so
okay.
look at this
You're
time,
good,
You're
Don't
killing me.
focus on the clock.
I couldn't talk to Stevie because I can't use the developmental level that I have now, hopefully, to talk to that. Here's one thing I would say, and I've been really into the Stoics of late.
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and some of these,
Yep.
and there's
We
modern
geek out
day
on that
Stoics. So
constantly.
one of the key concepts of Stoicism is actually going through a process, talk about an adaptive process of learning what it is that you can control and what you can't. Because if someone were listening to this and going, man, I'm like this and the mortgage business, I'm all tied up in knots and I'm worried about stuff, ask yourself, how much of what I worry about or concern or have fear around is within my control? And when you learn that primarily your worries and concerns and fears in life are stuff that's outside of your control, you can learn to go, let me focus on what I can control. And so what I learned from the Stoics, which is, I'm sure there's people that wrote about this. I thought about this and I was like, if you call someone like, Kirk's a stoic dude, what does that mean? It means he's stone-faced, unemotional.
Dry.
Yeah.
Here's what I really think happened. The Stoics actually learned not to freak out about crap they can't control. So to the people who are freaking out, they observed that, and they probably observed someone that's like this. But I don't think that they had a limbic system and a hippocampus and an amygdala just like everybody does. They have emotions. They just maybe got better at learning and going like, what are interest rates today? All your fear in the world is not going to affect what interest rates are today. You can worry about it till you're blue in the face, but while you're worrying about it, we're not focusing on the stuff that we do have control over. So could I go back and go, maybe focus on the things that you have control over and learn what you can't? But that's a lifelong journey.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And we'll still, even today, I'll walk out and go, I'm worried about this. And if I think about it, like, So that's why I have a coach.
Yep.
Help someone outside of you realize that you're focusing on stuff that you
But
can't control.
10-year-old Steve and 50-year-old Ken and 62-year-old
49, jerk.
can understand that.
We can.
I think so.
Yeah.
Focus on what you can control. That's a concept that's
you
probably
can understand
accessible.
it, the practice of that, especially for
Oh,
someone
agreed.
who's 50 years old who's been practicing freaking out about stuff that they can't control for 50 years. It won't, just because I tell you to just do that, you get how that starts to become largely unhelpful. Dude, just don't worry.
Right.
What?
Right.
Maybe we can help someone understand it at a deeper level.
Begin a process of learning how to do
That's
that.
right. Which you're on and going to your people, which I think is wonderful. So,
Steve Scanlon, thank you so much for joining
Much
us. This has been
appreciated.
absolutely awesome.
Yep.
yeah, hopefully it's instrumental and helpful for people.
Definitely.
Certain of that.